I'm Steve Resnikoff, and I'm a professor of law at DePaul University in Chicago, as well as the director of its Center for Jewish Law and Judaic Studies. This section focuses on defining anti-Semitism, an especially difficult and critically important challenge. Difficult because anti-Semitism continually assumes new forms and hides behind new masks. Critically important because of the increasing pervasiveness of pernicious anti-Semitism and its dire consequences. All of the panelists will speak in favor of what's known as the IRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, working definition of anti-Semitism, a definition that has been adopted or endorsed by 38 states and more than 1,334 entities worldwide. Because of time constraints, I'm not going to speak myself very much, but I want to mention one thing, and just one point, which is that the best is the enemy of the better. We've all heard that. In other words, we have to coalesce behind one definition and get it approved. We all know Jewish people. We all know that everybody has a better idea. We could tweak something this way, we could tweak something that way. But then we don't get it done. As one of the persons who asked a question before, she mentioned that we don't have a kit, a toolkit. We're not organized. Well, also we're not organized with respect to the definition. And we should, rather than quibble about this part or that part, we should never expect that we'll all agree. We don't have to all agree on the definition, but we should agree to, as a practical matter, to support the IRA definition. This impressive panel, or panel of impressive presenters, will proceed as follows. Each panelist will speak for no longer than 10 minutes. I've been asked to enforce this limit mercilessly to ensure that you have a chance to ask questions. They were supposed to have it. We have a clock there. So each panelist will pay attention to when he or she starts, and hopefully I won't have to give any nudges. The website has extensive biographical information about each of the panelists, so as a consequence, when I introduce each one right before she or he speaks, I'll be brief. The first panelist is Andrea Martin, a professor at Penn State Dickinson Law and co-founder and director of the Center for Jewish Legal Studies. Among other things, she serves on the Law Faculty Consultation Committee, advising the Claims Conference's Holocaust, Anti-Semitism, and the Law Center, as a fellow of the Center for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism, and as a member of the board of Penn State Hillel. Andrea.
Thank you. Okay, well, I am on this panel because I'm not only a professor of law at Penn State Dickinson Law, but I'm a mom. And I was a mom of 2 college students on October 7th, one at NYU and one at Penn State. And my son at NYU faced horrific anti-Semitism, and that's how I became engaged in this work. I researched the anti-Semitic incidences that occurred on college campuses nationwide and wrote an article about that in Brooklyn Law Review. And then once the university anti-Semitism task forces released their reports and the Congressional Committee released its report, I also analyzed the reports from elite universities, including Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia. And I don't have to tell people here in this audience that most of the anti-Semitic incidents were about excluding, marginalizing, harassing, and discriminating against Zionists. So maybe not Jews per se, but the word Zionists, students hid behind the cloak of Zionism to harass Jewish students on campuses. And when I looked at these university task force reports, there were 3 main conclusions in all of them. The first was that anti-Zionism was the primary driver of anti-Semitism on these campuses. Secondly, the Congressional Committee and the task forces concluded that anti-Semitism persisted on university campuses because administrators repeatedly failed to condemn anti-Zionist conduct that functioned as a proxy for anti-Semitism. And then third, they all said there is a need to explain to students, faculty, and administrators how opposition to Israel and Zionism can function as a way to exclude and harass Jewish students. So that's why we need a definition. We need a definition to explain when that conduct is used to harass students. And obviously, when anti-Semitism is straightforward, you don't need necessarily a definition, but it is the IRA definition that exclusively explains the demarcation between legitimate political discourse and anti-Semitic rhetoric and conduct. So it's very important on college campuses. I think we would all agree that college campuses should be places where robust political discourse and debate occurs. And the lovely thing about the IRA definition, contrary to those who oppose its claims, it protects legitimate political discourse about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it expressly states that conduct about Israel can be criticized in the way that any other country can be criticized. You can also criticize Israel. But what it does, it explains the difference, that demarcation, when anti-Israel, anti-Zionist conduct transforms into collective blame, dehumanization, or denial of self-determination. So here we are at Harvard, and I analyzed the Harvard report extensively. And my analysis of it was that in stark contrast to the other elite universities' reports, the analysis and the conclusions were poor. They did not effectively explain how anti-Zionist conduct resulted in harassment against Jews. In fact, I think it minimized the anti-Zionist conduct. On a positive note, the Brandeis Center for Human Rights was involved in ensuring that there was accountability. And I made notes today during Ken Marcus's welcome address. And one of the things that he said that stood out to me was that litigation and settlements result in administrators having to clarify obligations, that it exposes wrongdoing, and it requires change and improves accountability. And what we saw here at Harvard was once they were forced to be held accountable, they did include the IRA definition in their anti-discrimination policies. In addition, Harvard's handbook now says that for many Jewish people, Zionism is part of their identity. Conduct that would violate the non-discrimination is when it targets Jews or Israeli people, can also violate policies if it's directed at Zionists. This was a really important settlement, and it provides a model for other universities. How am I doing on time?
3 minutes.
Thank you. And, and it shows that we need this definition. And why do we need a definition? Stephen talked a little bit about the need for us to all support this definition. But for anti-Semitism specifically, it's very important because anti-Semitism is often misclassified, misidentified, and misunderstood. It really is unique in that way. It's difficult to classify because it operates along multiple axes. Different protected classes are implicated, including ethnicity and religion. It also is easily misidentified. It's known as the world's oldest hatred, and like anything that's been around since ancient times, it's evolved. It started as religious hatred, it moved to racial bigotry, to then ethno-religious bigotry, and to what we're seeing now, which is discrimination against Zionists or people who support Israel or are perceived to support Israel. And then finally, it's easily misunderstood. It's easily misunderstood. Although Jews are protected under Title VI, when administrators and adjudicators don't understand the contours of the conduct and where anti-Zionist behavior just acts as a proxy for discrimination against Jews, the entire regime of Title VI enforcement fails. So to conclude, we need universities and other organizations to adopt the IRA definition to properly classify, identify, and understand anti-Semitism.
Great, thank you very much, Andrea. So our second panelist is well known to everybody in this room. Obviously, everybody up here probably is well known to everybody in the room, but I'm not sure if they're known as well to everybody who's watching on the streaming YouTube. But she's Alyza Lewin, currently the president for U.S. Affairs for the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, CAM, and of course, former president of the Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. A co-founder of and partner in Lewin & Lewin LLP, she has successfully litigated and resolved many significant matters, including a landmark case establishing the rights of American victims of terror to obtain damages against organizations that knowingly provide financial support to international terrorist groups. Alyza.
Thank you. It's great to be back. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Karen, for inviting me to be part of this panel to talk about the IHRA definition, which is actually a topic I love talking about. It's kind of geeky, but I do, and to speak to all of you. So today, one of the greatest challenges that we probably have on university campuses is actually being able to distinguish between the legitimate good faith political debate about what's going on in the Middle East on the one hand, and the vilification or the demonizing and the shunning and the marginalizing of Jews on the basis of their Jewishness that's taking place on the other. And those who are engaging, right, in much of this Jew hatred, frequently the bad actors are deliberately trying to mask their Jew hatred under the guise of political debate. And they're the ones who are claiming that the IRA definition conflates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. The IRA definition does no such thing. The IRA definition actually does exactly the opposite. The IRA definition distinguishes between the criticism of Israel that's similar to that leveled against any other country, right? The good faith political debate on the one hand and the anti-Semitism on the other. Now, if you want to be able to use the IRA definition correctly, there are two things you really need to understand. One is you need to understand a bit about Jewishness. And some of that you've been hearing already today from the panels earlier, which is that Jewishness is defined by more than religious belief and religious practice. Right, before I came to the Brandeis Center, I was working, I have a law partnership with my father. I grew up in a home where my father always, this was even when I was a child, devoted a serious portion of his professional time and expertise to trying to make sure that Jews could practice our faith freely in this country. So a lot of the work that I did together with my father in terms of this work, this area in religious liberty had to do with making sure Jews could practice their faith. It was all about, right, protecting Sabbath observers, making sure my father argued in the Supreme Court the right to wear a yarmulke in the military, the right to put the big Chabad Hanukkah menorahs up in the public square, the right to put a mezuzah on your doorpost, the right to wear a beard in the police force. These were all the kinds of cases we were handling. And then when I came to the Brandeis Center and I started talking almost every single day to students, and this is about 8 years ago, so this is way before October 7th, 2023, I would talk on a daily basis to Jewish students, and many of those students were not religiously observant. They didn't observe the Sabbath. They didn't keep a kosher diet. And yet what they were describing to me was how they were actually already then being shunned and kept out of advocacy groups. Issues they felt passionate about, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, immigration issues, climate change. These groups were saying to them, well, wait, what kind of Jew are you? And when I would talk to them about their Jewishness, what became clear to me is that, while they may not have grown up observing the Sabbath or keeping kosher, they very much felt part of the Jewish people. And what it meant to them to be part of the Jewish people was that they felt connected to the Jewish people around the world contemporaneously, but they also felt connected to the Jewish people throughout history. So we just had the Passover Seder. That's because we were recognizing and commemorating that it was our ancestors who were liberated from slavery in Egypt and wandered for those 40 years in the desert to reach the Promised Land. And what was happening to these students is somehow the fact that they felt connected to their heritage, to the Jewish people, and to the Jewish people in Israel. The fact that they viewed Israel as the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and that from that recognition stemmed the notion that, sure, as a people, we have a right to self-determination in some borders of our ancestral homeland. Because they recognized that, that was getting them shunned and excluded or equated with evil, right? They were already then being told, you're supporting apartheid, you're supporting ethnic cleansing, we don't want you in our clubs. They were being pressured to disavow this part of their people's history and heritage in order to be accepted. That's the first piece you need to understand about Jewishness. The second thing you need to understand is a bit about how anti-Semitism, the pattern, the way it manifests over and over again throughout history. The way anti-Semitism works is first, it demonizes, it vilifies the Jew. The Jew becomes the scapegoat. It doesn't matter what the century, what the era, the Jew is to blame. And because this is at root a conspiracy theory, you can have 180-degree diametrically opposed allegations, right? That's how you get the Jew is the communist, the Jew is the capitalist. Right? But whatever it is that from where, right, the anti-Semite, right, from the person is sitting, whatever they view as their misfortune, as society's misfortune, whatever is causing them not to maybe benefit from today's society, it's the Jew's fault. There's a group that the Combat Anti-Semitism movement often partners with, and it's a group called Parents for Peace that helps parents whose kids have been radicalized. And there's a former reformed neo-Nazi who has spoken sometimes on conferences. And I listened to him. At one point, he told this story, and he said, you know, when I was a Nazi, it was so easy. He said everything was the Jews' fault. He said I had a problem with my girlfriend, the Jews were to blame. He said it was much easier to blame the Jew than to try and look inside myself to figure out what I might be doing wrong. And this is why anti-Semitism is such a threat to the general society. Because if all you're doing is blaming the conspiracy theory, you are never going to get to the root cause of what is your society's problem, and you're never going to fix it. Which is why when anti-Semitism flourishes, it rots the society where it grows. Right? So you have to understand that that's the way anti-Semitism works. It blames the Jew. And then the natural thing is, well, if the Jew is standing between me and utopia, let's get rid of the Jew. Right? So then you push the Jew out. Think about the yellow Star of David that the Nazis had the Jews wear. The idea was everyone now can recognize that Jew. Why? Not so that you engage with them. You don't use them, heaven forbid, as your lawyers or your doctors. You shun them. Maybe you spit at them when you walk past. Right? We push them out of acceptable society. But what's happening today is anti-Semitism doesn't only manifest and target individual Jews or the Jewish people. Today, we have a Jewish nation state. We have a Jewish collective. And what happens today is that Israel is often substituted into that conspiracy theory and blamed for today's misfortune. And the IRA definition, I'm going to tell you, it is a key paragraph of the IRA definition that everybody seems to forget. Now we've put, and I think it's correct, an emphasis on the examples, right? We want to make sure when people adopt the IHRA definition that they don't just use what we call kind of the black box definition at the top, but they include the 11 examples. But there's a paragraph in between that keeps getting left out, and that is the key paragraph to understanding how the IRA definition is supposed to work. That paragraph says, and I quote, manifestations might include the targeting of the state of Israel conceived as a Jewish collectivity. In other words, when is it anti-Semitism? It's anti-Semitism when you're not criticizing the policies of the government of Israel. It's anti-Semitism when you're using the word Israel to mean Jews as a collective. It's when you're using the word Zionist to mean Jews as a collective. And you're blaming them now. But then it goes on, this sentence says, however, criticism of Israel similar to that, leveled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. In other words, if you're going to substitute in Israel or Zionist into your demonization, you're blaming the Jew, that's anti-Semitism. If you're going to criticize Israel like people criticize the policies of every other government, that's not anti-Semitism. And then it goes on and says, anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong, right? There you have it. If what you're doing is, instead of blaming individual Jews or the Jewish people for why things go wrong, you're instead blaming Israel for harming humanity or why things go wrong, that's anti-Semitism. And the last final piece is just, why is it anti-Semitic to suggest that Israel has no right to exist? You read the IRA definition, and it says it's denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. In the 2010 version, it actually then said, by suggesting Israel has no right to exist, IRA changed it to declaring saying Israel's a racist endeavor. That's anti-Semitic, because if you deny the Jewish people their right to self-determination, at your root what you're doing, which is what we're seeing happening over and over again, is denying that the Jews are a people and denying that we have any history in the land of Israel. So to sum it up with all the messages of what we need to do, I think the call to action is over and over, like a mantra, we must be repeating, we are a people, we have an ancient heritage root in the land of Israel, and we have every right to fully embrace that history and heritage and fully engage on our university campuses, our society at large. And don't you dare try to erase that history heritage, demonize that history and heritage, or pressure us to disavow that history and heritage in order to engage in society today.
Well, so our third panelist is Julie Paris. She serves as the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director of Stand With Us. After receiving a BA in Judaic Studies at Tulane, she matriculated to Tel Aviv University and earned a master's in Middle Eastern history. She's devoted the last 25 years to fighting anti-Semitism and supporting Israel in both professional and volunteer capacities. As Stand With Us' Mid-Atlantic Regional Director, she educates and empowers Jews and non-Jews, both individually and organizationally, to combat anti-Semitism.
Thank you, and thank you so much to Ken and everyone who was a part of organizing this wonderful conference, and it's a pleasure to be a part of this panel, and hard to come after Alyza and Andrea, so I'm really so happy to be with all of you today. At Stand With Us, a large part of our mission is educating and empowering the next generation. That starts as early as kindergarten and going all the way through college and into community and beyond. And what we're seeing happening with our students, whether it's middle schoolers, Jewish middle school students who are being taunted with Nazi salutes and told to free Palestine, whether it's a Jewish student who expresses concern about his grandmother's well-being in Israel and is told by fellow students, your grandmother should leave Israel and should cease to exist, or whether it's Jewish students who are no longer welcome to participate in student government as a result of their, quote, affiliation with Zionism. We are seeing our students and community members pushed out of spaces where we were traditionally comfortable. The IRA definition provides a framework, as has already been noted, a way to define for ourselves what contemporary anti-Semitism may look like. Jews are the only group who somehow is not allowed to define our own hatred. When a black person says that something is racist, we do not question them or interrogate them about what that looks like. We accept it, we internalize it, and we learn from it. The same is true for the Jewish community. We have every right to define who we are and what expressions of hate towards us might look like, whether that's classical anti-Semitism through neo-Nazi activity, or whether that's through the modern manifestations of anti-Zionism as a collective hate movement where Jews are targeted for libel based on lies of genocide, settler colonialism, and baby killing in some cases. So I think what we see with our Jewish students today is a need to be empowered, a need for them to recognize that they're not alone. And IRA provides a tool for them to do that. And when they go to their administrators and they express concern about an incident of anti-Semitism in which they were targeted, administrators who don't understand what contemporary anti-Semitism looks like freeze. And they start to say to themselves, well, that sounds like political speech. And it's very easy to say that when you don't understand Zionism, when you don't understand that Zionism is a core component of Jewish identity. And for the vast majority of Jews, Judaism is inexplicably tied to Israel in some form. And so it's very easy for them to freeze and say, well, it sounds like a problem that you can figure out for yourselves. I think it's just free speech. But when free speech crosses the line, when there are threats of violence, when Jews are targeted by professors, when Jews are targeted by fellow students, when Jews are excluded from clubs, that is not free speech. That has crossed the line. And IRA provides a framework for which our government officials, our college administrators, and our teachers can learn from us what it means to be a Jew today. And because we all know in this room that anti-Semitism is uniquely conspiratorial, it changes with each generation, it looks different, it can be very hard to identify. And that's exactly why IRA is a working definition. But I think that when we see universities and elected officials, university leaders, adopting IRA, they're saying, we're taking a step in the right direction. Of course, what comes after it is what matters most, just as with those trainings that we've talked about today. The training's great, but if you're not actually implementing it, then it doesn't really mean too much. So I think what we see today is that we want to be able to empower our students to speak up. We want them to know that there are tools out there to support them, because often they don't know exactly what this anti-Semitism is. They can't put into words, this feels like hate towards me. But they don't really know how to explain it, and IRA gives them the tool to do that. And when we see pushback, that pushback is often either coming from people who don't understand the definition or who are intentionally malicious and malevolent towards the Jewish community. They're actually perpetuating anti-Semitism against us, and they don't want to be caught out for it. And it's not because it's something unique about IRA, it's because it's a mirror that's looking them in the face. And it's not up to us to shield them from the hate they may be perpetuating. It's up to us to put a mirror in their faces so that they can learn, so that they can do a better job of, for example, criticizing Israel without crossing the line into anti-Semitism. So I think for our students, we really see the advocating for IRA and the usage of IRA on campuses as a message to our Jewish community that you have a place here. You belong here, and we're going to take anti-Semitism seriously. But as long as our community, our elected officials, and our university administrators view Zionism as political, it's impossible to combat the anti-Semitism that we're seeing on campuses today. And that also relates to our structure of extremism on both the far left and the far right, who seem to agree on nothing else other than Jew hatred. And so you'll see a political figure on the left all of a sudden say, I never thought I would agree with this far right, someone on the far right, somebody who's perpetuating white supremacy, but he's right about this. He's right about Israel. He's right about Jews. And so Jews as the collective take the fall for whatever humanity has deemed the most ill qualities in society today. So when people complain about IRA, just to be clear, our students don't come to us and say, I'm really upset about political discourse about Israel. They come to us and say, I wanted to run for student government, but I was blocked because I'm a Jew. Or I was in a class and a professor failed me on an assignment because I wrote about Israel. And so it's not necessarily the way that we want our students to have to respond today. Most of them, they want to go to school, they want to be with their friends, they want to go to a great college, and we want to provide them with the opportunity to do that. And IRA is a tool in our toolbox. It doesn't create new laws. It helps administrations to enforce laws that already exist. And I think as we view this session in the framework of the 250th anniversary of the US, it really gives us a time to reflect on what the next 250 years will look like for Jews in America. What do we want it to look like? How do we fulfill George Washington's promise of freedom for all? How do we make sure that Jews continue to have a place wherever it might be? And it's through our legal resources, through our legislation, through our education. And if, stand with us, is our motto is education is the road to peace, and lack of education kills. And so for us, it's very, very important that we educate our administrators, push back against the narratives that IRA somehow restricts free speech, somehow says that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. I was actually just attending an event at the University of Pittsburgh Law School that was sponsored by Students for Justice in Palestine and the ACLU. And someone from that group got up and specifically said, IRA says that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. And I was biting my tongue. And it's very hard to combat these kinds of lies. But that's why this structure exists for us. The structure exists so that we can better protect our Jewish community, so that we can empower our community members and our students to speak up whenever they might need to, and make sure that good people who want to understand anti-Semitism have the tools to do that. And just the last piece I'll say, coming from Pittsburgh, I lived through the Tree of Life massacre. That was my synagogue. I grew up there. I had my bat mitzvah there. And after October 27, 2018, the world rallied around us. People came from every space, every social justice movement, every human rights organization, and they marched with us and they said, we stand with you against anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, after October 7th, most of those groups, most of those individuals not only disappeared from our lives, but were actively lobbying against us. We're marching in the streets, calling for a free Palestine from the river to the sea, and saw absolutely no contradiction with that discrepancy. And that is why IRA matters, because we need to show them that anti-Semitism doesn't just look like a white supremacist coming into a synagogue and murdering people. It's horrific, and it's a nightmare. But it can also look like Jews being shot outside of two consulate workers being shot outside of a Jewish museum, or someone marching for the hostages, someone throwing a firebomb at them while shouting Free Palestine. We have to be able to identify it, we have to be able to define it, to defeat it, and only the Jewish community has the ability and the rights to do that. And just one last piece on anti-Zionist Jews. I think it's very important that as we see Jews lobbying against IRA, for example, that we recognize that it's not about the identity of the person, it's about their ideas. So if somebody is saying, well, I'm Jewish and I'm against IRA, that's fine. But for the vast majority of the Jewish community who recognizes that discrimination against us can look like many different forms that IRA describes, we are allowed to define it. It doesn't mean that every single person has to agree, but it means that it's the ideas themselves, not the identity of the person who's perpetuating it.
Our fourth panelist is Nathan Diament, Executive Director of the Orthodox Union Advocacy Center, a graduate of the Harvard Law School. He's led the Orthodox Union's nonpartisan policy advocacy for over 30 years. Among other things, he has helped to craft major federal legislation, as well as other measures, to promote U.S.-Israel relations and religious liberty, and to combat anti-Semitism. He served on White House and the Department of Homeland Security advisory boards, and his insightful opinions have been widely published throughout the mainstream media. Nathan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks to Ken and Karen and the whole team for putting together this wonderful conference and inviting me to participate. I'm not going to speak about the importance of the definition on campus. I'm going to speak about it in my arena, which is politics and legislation in Washington, and why it's important there, but I have one contrarian point to make. So yesterday, 40 senators voted to block American weapons sales to Israel. The vote failed, but 40 senators did that. Was this anti-Semitic? Does it matter that at the same time these senators, some of whom are Jewish, issued the following statement? And forgive me, I'm going to read this because I want to be accurate. We strongly support Israel's right to defend itself and the right of the people of Israel to live in peace and prosperity in a Jewish state. And we condemn the dramatic and dangerous explosion of anti-Semitism that we have witnessed since the terrorist attacks of October 7, 2023. Being a stalwart friend of Israel, however, does not mean agreeing with all the decisions of the Israeli government or Prime Minister Netanyahu, just like being a patriot of the United States does not require unquestioning agreement with the policy decisions of President Trump and his administration. We've opposed the Iran war and will continue to do so, and we plan to vote against the President's war supplemental funding bill. For the same reason, we will vote in favor of the 2 joint resolutions of disapproval today. Measures to oppose the U.S. sale of specific weapons and equipment to Israel, which might be used in Iran, or to facilitate further settlement activity, which we believe undermine Israel's long-term security and our own. Number 2, a couple months ago, a woman named Carrie Prejean-Baller, then a member of the President's Commission on Religious Liberty, argued in that forum that she, as well as her compatriot Candace Owens, should not be labeled as anti-Semitic because she, quote, just doesn't support Zionism, and that's her position based on her Catholic faith. Was that anti-Semitic? Does it matter that other Catholic clergy rejected her assertion of Catholic teaching on this? And finally, the mayor of New York City has sided with those who assert Israel has committed genocide in Gaza, but condemned anti-Semitic vandalism perpetrated on a Jewish school in Brooklyn and other anti-Semitic incidents like that. Do we view the mayor as an anti-Semite? These are just a few of the recent incidents in which I think many in the Jewish community know how we would answer these questions. We have an innate sense of our own version of, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it when it comes to anti-Semitism. But in the political arena in which I advocate, vagueness around these questions is unhelpful. And the most important currency in politics are votes. And advocates and voters need to be able to say with clarity to politicians, I will vote for you if you do X. I will not vote for you if you do Y. And from my perspective and in my work, this is the most important need for a definition of anti-Semitism. To draw a line as clearly as we can and make clear to politicians that if they cross this line, there will be consequences. You will not have my vote. I will work for your opponent, etc. Now here's the contrarian point I'm going to make. Even as the Orthodox Union has and continues to support legislation to codify the IHRA definition, I don't think at this stage of the game that's the most important way to further the definition and to use our political capital. As Julie was just saying a few minutes ago, we don't need Congress, to speak in OU terms, we don't need Congress's hechsher, we don't need Congress's approval of how we want to define anti-Semitism. We don't need them to codify it. We don't need them to give us permission to use it to hold members of Congress and other politicians accountable. We can use the IHRA definition because we say that's the definition. There are many other bills, there are many other votes, there are many other policies to scorecard on, and again, we should not make ourselves contingent on their agreement to what we view as the definition of anti-Semitism. We should use the IHRA definition. We should define hatred against us as we see fit. We need to rally ourselves around it, and we need to do it, but it's the accountability that's most important. We need to assert that you cannot explain away voting against providing Israel with defensive weapons by asserting you're for Israel's right to defend itself, but oppose the prime minister. We need to assert that you cannot hide behind a false claim about your religion and defend accusations of deicide by the Jews. And we have to assert that you cannot make yourself kosher by condemning anti-Semitic graffiti while embracing the ideas that motivate the vandals in the first place. We get to define what anti-Semitism is, and when we do that clearly, we can hold politicians accountable.
Do we have somebody circulating with microphones?
While you're getting a microphone, can I just respond to the contrarian
Go right ahead.
point for a minute?
I had to make it interesting.
So I now have been giving law enforcement training. And when I give law enforcement training in Georgia, it ends up being different than the law enforcement training in New York. Because the law enforcement training in Georgia has passed an IHRA bill. They also have a hate crimes bill that makes it clear and explicitly directs the law enforcement to include in their reports when they're investigating potential hate crimes any evidence that might be evidence of potential bias. So when I train them and I teach them about IRA. I also teach them about all sorts of symbols like the inverted red triangle and the watermelon symbol and the bloody red hands. And then I teach them also about slogans that are viewed as anti-Semitic, globalize the Intifada, and even the resistance by any means, what that means. And for them, right, they have a very concrete reason now to have to understand that and use it. In New York, especially now after the mayor reversed the executive order on IRA, I can try and explain to them IRA, but it's just kind of a nice thing there that I teach them, but they're under no obligation to actually engage with it and utilize it. So I do think that certainly on a state by state level, it does make a difference whether or not a state has adopted the IHRA definition.
Okay, great.
And also how it's used in investigations. So if the Office of Civil Rights, which has adopted IRA, didn't utilize that in an investigation into claims of anti-Semitism by Jewish students and our allies, they may be hard-pressed to understand what that would look like. And so I think I could see how on a federal level, there are ways where our congressional reps, we ask of them a lot and we expect of them a lot, as we should, but maybe IRA doesn't come into their everyday lives. But I do think that on an investigative level, like even in the state of Pennsylvania where IRA has not been adopted, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission has adopted IRA, and we do trainings with them. Stand With Us does trainings for them on how to implement that in real time. And I think for a long time, Jews may be, and as I think we heard from Andrea earlier, Jews might be hesitant to file complaints for a variety of reasons, whether it's because they're afraid of their job, they're afraid of retaliation, but it's also because they don't feel that anyone's going to listen to them. But we hope that IRA provides an additional measure and a tool that I think is helpful, whether it's through law enforcement, whether it's through university administrators, being held accountable for their own policies and procedures that they already have in place. Again, this is not about special treatment for the Jews, this is about equal treatment. And so I think it does offer just another layer. And to me, when a university adopts it, when a school adopts it, it says, at least we're listening to you.
I have a question for the panel members. I know that Andrea mentioned to me, and Julie mentioned the idea of Jews who oppose IRA, Jews who oppose it. In terms of the law, in terms of regular civil rights law and discrimination law, what's the perspective of the law with respect to the need for any universal agreement with among the members of the protected class as to what's discrimination?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I could say that. So if you want to take it, but I think in general, you don't need universal approval to determine discrimination. What discrimination looks like for one person, another person might not agree with it. It doesn't mean it's not discrimination. We don't all have to agree on what it looks like for discrimination to be proven. And so I think from a legal perspective, again, I'm speaking as a community director, but we see this very often. And they'll say, well, it sounds like you Jewish people, you can't agree, so therefore we're not going to do anything. But the reality is, if a person feels discriminated against, even if someone else in that same group does it, it doesn't mean that the discrimination against the victim isn't real.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm not a lawyer, just hang out.
Thank you for your comments. My question is, my concern with IRA is that it is quickly becoming out of date. That as anti-Semitism mutates and moves, that already IRA is already missing things that I think if we were drafting IRA today, we would be in a different position. So when I think of the three primary foundational libels of the current major iteration of Jew hatred that we're seeing, colonizer, apartheid, and genocide, there are two examples in IRA that I think can be used to explain why those are a form of anti-Semitism. The one that says that you comparing Israel to Nazis and the one about blood libel, without really defining blood libel. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. As we, right now we know what the most common forms of anti-Semitism are looking like. We don't know what they're going to look like in the future. I'm always thinking that, like, if aliens invade Earth, and if most Earthlings like the aliens, then Jews are going to not be aliens. And if most Earthlings hate the aliens, Jews are going to be aliens, right? And we're not going to have that in this definition. So I guess I wonder to what extent you feel like there is a way to use IRA and to make it clear that it can't possibly capture everything that is happening right now, and how you're doing that in your work.
So all of the things that you mentioned are all now equating the Jews with this evil concept, right? Einat Wilf calls it the placard strategy, right? She talks about how what was going on campus way before October 27, 2023 was that the idea was it was as if you had a Jewish star. It could all be boiled down to this equation. The Jewish star equals the Zionist equals, you name it, whatever the evil concept is. Apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide, mass expulsions, baby killing, whatever it is, famine, right? It's that evil concept, and the idea is the Jews responsible for it. And then she said, after October 7th, you saw the new signs, and they actually showed up on campuses. You can see pictures of them, where they said, now let's keep the campus clean. And they had a picture of the Star of David in the garbage can, right? So the idea is, again, right, that paragraph that I said in IRA, people keep missing, which is, if you want to claim that the Jews, individual Jews, the Jewish people, or the Jewish collective, and the Jewish collective is now Israel or Zionist as a term being used instead of the Jews, right, are the ones responsible for harming humanity, all of these are harming humanity, right, that is anti-Semitism. If you want to actually talk about policies, that's not. But all of these things are there. In addition, I would say colonizer there's another level, because colonizer is erasing and denying my Jewish history and heritage. You cannot call the Jews colonizers unless you erase our millennia of existence in the land of Israel, right? You erase and deny the Old Testament and the Bible. So the colonizer is yet another category, but that's how I would address all of those.
I also wanted to address that. So I think what's interesting about this definition is it was created over 2 decades ago, and I think it perfectly describes what's happening, especially after October 7th. So I really look at this definition and I find it remarkable. And the thing about definitions or rules, I'm a law professor, and so what I teach my students is to read a group of cases and come up with one rule, essentially a definition, for a term so that the judge can easily identify the issue. And so with definitions, right, they need to be not too narrow, not too broad, and that's what I teach them, how to write a rule that fits so that this works. And we know that IRA works, right? It is a proven tool, because as soon as there was, an executive order that said that the IRA definition needed to be used in assessing claims or allegations of anti-Semitic harassment, there was clarity for adjudicators, for judges. So I think that the IRA definition has an appropriate level of narrowness and broadness so that, by including anti-Semitic tropes, these broad terms, a lot of things fit into that. And that's why I think it does work.
But I would also say that we know that anti-Semitism is uniquely evil and morphs throughout time. So we can't expect a definition to last forever. And while this definition was codified in 2016, and I think is very comprehensive, particularly given the time frame that it was adopted, when many people were not aware of the challenges that many Jews were facing already, and that have been going on, I would say, for close to over 25 years in the United States, but that it's possible that IRA will need to be amended, or that we will need to have additional guardrails put in place as we continue to see the perpetuation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism today, specifically targeting our Jewish community for this libel against Zionists and the code word of Zionist for Jew.
Nathan, anything you want to add? So I just wanted to take the prerogative to add something, not as a member of the panel, but when I mentioned at the beginning that the best is the enemy of the better, I didn't mean it because the people who were arguing for the best had bad motives. So even people with the best motives, but if we don't, we need to get IRA, I believe, approved as widespread as possible, and then worry about fine-tuning later on.
Any other questions?
Yes. This gentleman over here.
I'm Joel Trachtman. The Office of Equal Opportunity at my university says that they don't define any discrimination in advance. And I worry that when they decide to pursue cases, they might take a more expansive view of other types of discrimination against other minority groups than the view that they take of discrimination against Jews or Israelis. And I wonder how we can address that, how we can deal with that kind of problem. Thank you.
So first of all, I think that when you're dealing with discrimination that's on the basis of a single, right, the color of one's skin, right, whether it's discrimination against, the nation, your national origin, right, those are relatively easy for society to recognize. The problem with recognizing anti-Semitism is right, these conspiracy theories, there's no end to the way what they come up with next. But also, in addition, I think the problem and what university, DEI offices need to understand is that first part, which we're talking about Jewishness. I think that especially before October 7th, most university administrators, when they thought about the Jews, they thought about religious belief and religious practice. So what did their Jewish students on campus need? Maybe they needed kosher food. Maybe they needed a Yom Kippur accommodation. That was it. The notion that Jews could be targeted on the basis of our peoplehood and our people's ancient connection to Israel, foreign. That's not a way they thought about Jews. And so what is the number one most important thing, I think, that you need to be able to educate your DEI office is that the Jews are a people with an ancient connection rooted in the land of Israel, and that they're being targeted now on that basis. And even whether you have a definition or don't have a definition, you have to make sure to protect the Jewish students on your campus when they're being targeted on that basis.
And it's unavoidable. The facts are there. The facts are that Jews represent just 2.4% of the U.S. population, but are the victims of over 65% of all hate crimes, and that's religiously based hate crimes. That doesn't even take into account the full account of that. And so the facts are out there. And so I think for university administrators who claim that they want to support their Jewish students and our allies, IRA is a tool. And so even if they don't have any other definitions and they don't understand why they need a definition and they don't, quote, adopt things, they can still utilize IRA. So they don't need to adopt it formally. I mean, I think ideally we'd love to see that, but also you say to them when you investigate in your Title IX office or hopefully in your Title VI office, how do you define discrimination against Jews? And so even if they're referencing it, that's better than that's better than nothing. And so I think the question is, how do you determine discrimination against Jews if you don't have a definition to do that?
Yes, could somebody bring a mic to the back? By the way, I know that Ken has spoken about this in the past, that because of the executive orders of the president, many of the universities are obligated to refer to the IRA definition as a matter of, because of the executive order. And so that would be a response to your DEI officers or the like, that there's now a federal requirement under the law to consider these criteria.
Right, I think that's a good point. The Office of Civil Rights considers it and must consider it. So wouldn't it behoove you as the university to utilize the same criteria so that you don't get in trouble? So that's a great point.
And it is a protective measure for them.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank our amazing panelists. Thank you for everything that you're doing, and this discussion is incredibly important. I'm also a law professor, And that is why I think the definitions are incredibly important. It's important. It's important to define what we're dealing with. It's also important not just for the students or faculty or administrations, also for the judges, right? We've seen so much going on in litigation, so many different whitewashing anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, and it's unacceptable. The other thing is why I think defining anti-Semitism is so important is because when students do go to the administration, where they do go to the offices, what do? What are they doing? They wouldn't do that with any other group. They're telling them to get counseling? They don't need counseling. They need somebody to do something, and that is why tools at hand are important, to document, to fight, to know what we're dealing with. And so I actually think we need very strong definitions, and we also need to make the judges know what are we talking about, so they won't be able to whitewash these things in litigation.
That is a great point, Anat. I was talking to Ken Marcus last night. I'm preparing expert witness testimony in a federal case involving anti-Semitism in Arizona, and it's just unbelievable to me. But what seems obvious to us when there's discrimination and harassment of Zionists and it being anti-Semitic, we really need to make that connection for adjudicators, for judges. We have to explain it. And the IRA definition helps with that explanation and being able to apply the facts to the law and show that. But you're right, without a tool, as you say, without an effective tool, without definitions, without rules, what we have is a hesitant enforcement of the law. And more importantly, we have that students, workers, individuals are not protected adequately. And so that's where the real danger lies without a definition like this. So thank you for your point.
Yes, can we get a microphone over here to this part of the room?
Can I?
Yes, okay.
Thanks.
Yes.
Okay, let's take both questions at the same time.
Thank you. Hi, my question is for Julie. Harvard adopted the IRA definition, but I'm wondering about the difference between adoption and implementation. I know that there are a number of faculty members, including from the Council for Academic Freedom, who believe that the IRA definition was just adopted under duress. Only adopted kind of like their hands were tied and now we have to have it and we're just signaling to the feds that we're doing what we're told. How do we go from adoption just to signal something to actual implementation that matters?
You have the Trump administration bring the
Well,
Exactly. Wait for them to fail and then hold them accountable.
Thank you. I guess that my question is somehow relevant to that, and it's also relevant to the very, very short argument that I wish would be longer between Nathan and Alyza.
It wasn't really an argument.
I claim that there is more
Define
to this
define
thing.
He
argument.
wants more arguing.
And you're too Jewish, so I'm sure we can find something to argue about. By the way, I'm Lior Alon. I'm a mathematician from MIT. I'm also part of the lawsuit of Brandeis against MIT. My point is, and I'm saying it as a mathematician, definitions are my life. Definition for what purpose? I think that we should distinguish between definition for law and definitions for lawyers, definition for judges, and between values and some kind of a guiding line for politicians, for administration, for teachers, for universities, for the public schools of my kids. They should not be thinking as law professors. When you are in a law, everything is binary, 0 or 1. You can prove it, and if you don't prove it, it's not that. When you're in real life, the situation is significantly more complex. It's mostly gray, but there are certain things that I didn't grow up in the US. I didn't grow up in a place that ever had slavery, or that I know, or that I'm related to that. I'm well aware to the fact that I'm not supposed to wear a white hood when I go to MIT. There's no rule. I checked, there is no rule about not wearing white hoods when I go to MIT. But I'm well aware of this fact. Okay? Somehow people are not aware of the fact that they are not supposed to call me or my fellows having Zionist mind infection. Okay, and we need to prove that when someone said that we have a Zionist mind infection, we need to prove it. Now, the mere fact that we need to prove it and we need to find a definition that shows, that relates the Zionism to the Judaism and the Judaism to the anti-Semitism, the mere fact that we're the only one that needs to prove it, it's a problem. So when we're talking about the IRA definition, I would start by asking for what purpose, and I think it's very, very clear to have a clear definition when you're in court, and there should be very, very clear that you shouldn't have a clear definition, a 0-1 definition, when we're talking about values and we're talking about real life, and we should be very, very clear that there are things that are unacceptable, but you don't need to specify each and every one of them. And this is why when we were talking about if the baby killers and there would be more. We would put a line here and they would find something here. No, we need a very clear guiding lines for society for how to help us Jewish people feel part of society, and this cannot be IRA definition.
So let me just
so
ask
thank you for taking my side in the argument against Alyza. And just to add on to that point, and I know you want to get to the end, I think if you read through the statement that I read to you, that the senators who voted against the arms sales to Israel made, I think they've satisfied the IRA definition.
I agree.
Okay? I would not say any of those senators is anti-Semitic. I think that was an anti-Semitic vote. And I would like us as a community in the political arena, not in a court of law and not in an EEOC hearing, I would like us as a community to be able to say, Senator, you're not an anti-Semite, but that was an anti-Semitic vote. You voted against defensive weaponry to Israel when my brothers, sisters, nephews, uncles are fighting for their lives.
So I'm sorry.
And that's the point. The OU is 100% for the IRA definition. It should be used and implemented in all the appropriate arenas. There's more in the political world that we need to be doing to hold politicians accountable and to say to them, even if it's not within the four corners of the IRA definition, that's not kosher.
And I should apologize for not getting an answer to your question.
I'm not going to
first.
answer her question.
But your question, I believe, is those who were involved in the settlement, the government, have to continue to monitor and hold accountable to see if, in fact, they actually enforce it. If they don't enforce it, they don't bring charges against people based on it, then they're in violation of the agreement.
And then they'll have problems in the current lawsuit that's been brought by the Department of Justice.
Right, but it takes heroes to step forward.
Yes.
So if we don't hear from our students, so Stand With Us builds this cadre of Jewish student leaders across the country, and some are actually in this room, some who were former interns in our high school department and on our campus department. We rely on them and our brave student leaders who have to tell us and tell Brandeis Center and tell their universities what they're experiencing, because only then can we hold administrations accountable. So if they want to do it as empty language, that's fine, but they will be held accountable if they fail to implement. And the last piece I want to say about what you said is just that only Israel. I think it's important to note that it's only Israel that these senators chose to vote against. They didn't bring up any other country, and I think that's where we see this anti-Semitic vote coming into play.
We have another question right here.
Well, I'm not sure that we can go on. We're beyond our time.
Let him get that question.
Oh, fine, good.
Yeah.
So
Because we
I'm
started
curious how much of this conversation can be simplified to shifting from a framework that thinks about anti-Semitism as religious discrimination to a framework that thinks about anti-Semitism as national origin discrimination. I know this is something that's come up in your remarks previously, but I wonder, to what extent can the IRA definition and the broader conceptual leap that we're encouraging be boiled down to those terms? I bring that up in part because I've been rereading Mordecai Kaplan's Judaism as Civilization recently, and Kaplan, I think, makes this very powerful point that any Jew, is free to say they think of themselves as only belonging to a religion, but they're not free to make that decision for the great majority of the Jewish people who don't think of themselves in those terms. And I wonder if that is a framework that has particular resonance in the present moment.
I think that the answer is the laws in this country must be drafted, interpreted, and applied to protect Jews on the basis of both. It has to protect Jews on the basis of their religious belief and religious practice, and it has to protect Jews on the basis of our shared ancestry and ethnicity, which encompasses race and national origin. Got to do both. Otherwise, you're not protecting Jews, and Jews are not free. Jews are not free and not protected. There's no freedom of religion for Jews if you can't express both.
Thank you very much. We have to stop now, and I appreciate all the audience participation. During the break, you maybe come up to individuals and ask them your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.